Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today I'm going to be talking about white fluffy stuff. And if you think that's cotton wool, you're completely wrong. If you think it's the clouds in the sky, you're also wrong. What I'm talking about is something that is the equivalent of, I don't like using the word white gold because that's associated with sugar, but it really is another white gold, and that is wool. And years ago, most towns, cities, settlements were basically built from the wool industry. If you go back to the early medieval period and then directly all the way through the medieval and into the Tudor, most towns were making lots and lots of money on the wool trade. There was even a huge amount of wool smuggling in the Middle Ages as well. There was quite a bit of it going on, and at one point people had to be buried in a woolen shroud just to keep the wool workers in business. It's just a shame now in 2020 that wool is often looked upon as a byproduct, and it's often thrown out. It's often sold really, really cheap, whereas years ago most clothing, especially outerwear, was made of this magical substance. So wool is a really, really important thing. If you look at the Treasury or the Treasurer in the House of Parliament, he still sits on a wool sack, for example. If you have a look at the city of Worcester, where we're from, or any of the other big cities, you will probably find in the past a link to the wool trade. Now, wool is a very important stuff that can be woven specifically to make cloth, which in turn can be used to make clothing. And you don't have to kill the sheep, as many of you will know. You have to give the sheep a haircut. So you shear the sheep, and it's the shorn wool which you then process to make the cloth. So in this little video, I'm just going to show you briefly how medieval people were processing this valuable substance. So when you first get the wool, it's often covered in all sorts of rubbish. You may have animal feces on it, you may have mud on it, you may have twigs and brambles stuck in it, and obviously to a certain degree you may even have things crawling around in it. Especially in the summer, you may have things wriggling around in it. So what you have to do is clean it, and they didn't use a huge amount of detergent. And if you look at a previous video when I was talking about soap, for example, soap was often used in the cloth manufacturing process. Often more common to use soap in cloth manufacturing than it was on your body. However, you don't want to use too much soap, you don't want to use too much detergent, because wool, like many natural things, have to a certain degree its own natural waterproof oil. In other words, the lanolin inside it. So you don't really want to knock too much of that out. When the Romans came to Britain, or as they called it, Britannia, they loved buying or trading with the Britons to buy heavy woolen cloaks, and they went all over the empire. I asked a farmer once why British wool is so good, and it was really down to the fact that our country is rather damp. Even if you go back to Roman times, the Romans actually complained about this country being either raining, or when it wasn't raining, it was a land shrouded in mist and fog. So the lanolin in British wool is actually very, very good. It's very, very strong, very water repellent. So you don't technically need any waterproof clothing. You just need good quality wool, and you need to clean it, like I said. So they would have soaked it in water. They would have took off the bulk of the twigs and sticks that might be stuck into it, and then they would have had to have cleaned it. And in the medieval period, it was quite common to take the wool and place it between a set of paddles like this one. These were known as cards, and what you might be able to see from there is there are tiny iron spikes that are held into a leather band on a wooden paddle. And these are important because if you start spinning the wool from this moment onwards, you may have flaws in the yarn, shall we say, and that's because wool I always say is very much like morning hair style. It goes in every direction, and if you spin wool at that point, it won't be very, very strong. There will be flaws, there will be natural areas where one bit's going one way, one bit's going the other. So the main purpose of a set of cards is actually to not only clean it some more, but it's actually to ensure that the fibres of the wool is going in the same way. So if I take a small amount here and place it on the cards like so, you will see what I mean. So what we're doing is carding it, combing it, to ensure the fibres all travel in the same way. I'll just show you quickly. There we go. The fibres are now going all in one direction, and that's quite important. Once you've done that, the wool is much cleaner and much softer and much more fluffed out, shall we say. The next process would have been the spinning roll. Now, for centuries, even as far back as the Bronze Age, something like this would have been used, and this is called a spindle. This is specifically a drop spindle. So what you do is you attach the wool that you've just cleaned and combed in the same direction to the top, and the weight of this stretches the wool, but because you are keeping the rhythm going, because you're tapping the bottom of this, this spins and it twists the wool. And what will happen is, after a long period of time, and this is very much hard work, and you would have had to have been doing this all your time, you would have got better and better at it, you would end up with yarn. And there we have a ball of yarn, and that yarn is now pretty strong. All the fibres are held together, they're all facing the same way, and that is ready for the next bit of the process. Now, by the end of the medieval period, we do end up having spinning wheels being used. They may have origins a little bit earlier, but we definitely know these were becoming more and more common by the end of the Middle Ages, and that actually speeds up the process of creating your yarn. Then we need to weave. So you've spun it, you've cleaned it, you've spun it, you now go on to the weaving. The oldest forms of looms look like that, and these are ones that you would find in an Iron Age roundhouse, even a Bronze Age house, and they stand upright, usually in the corner of your roundhouse, or later on in history in your more rectangular homes, and it was used for creating the cloth. And what you have to do is you have weighted yarn going down, that's known as the warp, and then in and out going across you have the weft. And if you keep doing that for a long period of time, and you have to remember there's no television to watch, you should end up with some fabric, some cloth like this. And if there's any children watching this and this is helping you with homework help, which is what we're here for, just have a look at the clothing that you're wearing today, because the clothing you wear today still has lines going down, lines going across, because the weaving process on a loom hasn't really changed. We do get looms changing slightly. There's the more common frame looms that come in as the period goes by, and then when you get up to the Victorian era, it's all becoming very mechanical and you're having steam powered looms, and that leads us on to a completely different way of living, which is where we've gone from the cottage industry, as people manufacturing this at home, going into factories and working in factories to produce more and more of those items. But wool can be woven in lots of different ways. You can keep it in this plain colour. You can use two different types of yarn, a red and a blue, for example, and that will give you all sorts of patterns with it. Even the Iron Age Britons did like the check pattern. I always say looks very much like tartan, but it isn't. But they preferred check. The Romans mentioned this in their accounts when they came to Britain. There's different types of weaving though. Like I said, sometimes you can go over two and under one and so on, and it gives you all sorts of patterns, including herringbone. In Worcester, we actually started producing a fine quality cloth that was hard wearing but very strong, and that was known as broadcloth. It was a specialism for Worcester specifically. It's one of the reasons why Queen Elizabeth I came to Worcester, to see our fine cloth manufacturing. It's also the reason why, if you wander around Worcester, we have a street known as Broad Street. It's where we get the word from, not because it's a wide street, because of the broadcloth. Once you've got it this colour, if you've got it plain, you can then dye it. And in the cities, in the towns, you would have had not only the weavers, the spinners and so on, you would have also had the dyers, and they would have been using vegetable and plant dyes to create the colours that you want. We know, for example, onion skins will give you an orange colour. We know colours or plants such as woad and madder will give you blue in red colours. You can produce pretty much any colour that you want, really. We often think of the past as an age where everything is dull. What you have to remember is they could create quite vivid colours, really. Throughout the medieval period and into the Tudor, there were sumptuary laws which prevented you having certain colours to a certain degree. And the hardest colours to dye are things like black and purple. You can create grey, that's easy enough, but to create black was very, very difficult. So black and purple was usually worn by the more upper classes. The same with dark blues and dark greens. But when you start looking at the muddy colours, the earthy colours, like a dirty brown, a greeny brown, a khaki colour as such, they're more for your commoners, and including undyed cloth. In Worcester, we also have an area known as the Tithing. There is also an alleyway known as Rack Alley. They're all connected with the wool industry. For example, racks or tenter hooks, which is where tithing comes from, would have been strewn outside the city walls for drying the cloth once it had actually been dyed. The horrible thing, though, about dyeing is when you've dyed the cloth, it had to be soaked in a salt solution, which will fix the dye. We still do that today. However, in medieval times, they were using stale urine. The best stale urine, they say, came from the monasteries. Worcester had a lot of monastic buildings within it, including Greyfriars, Blackfriars, the cathedral monks there, mainly because they were drinking the wine. I think that's what made the urine a bit more potent, a bit stronger than your average ale drinker in the city. The urine, by the way, would actually fix the dye, and it's actually where one of the swear words that we use quite commonly, naughty naughty, from. If you were walking down the street and you had a bucket that was full of urine, it was quite common for a person to say, "Are you taking the..." And I'm not going to say it. It's where a swear word has become come from a trade as such, really. Once the cloth was created, they often used to comb the wool as well with things such as thistles. It brought out the fuzz, as I always call it, to the wool, making it very warm, making it very waterproof. But the wool industry was big. Was very big in Britain, and like I said, smuggling took place about it, and other countries wanted it. It was so important. It's just sad now wool is often looked upon as that horrible itchy thing that no one wants to wear. Anyway, on that note, stay safe, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the start of a new week, and make sure you contact us. Let us know what different topics you want us to talk about. Anyway, see you soon. Bye bye.